My name is Katie Garner, and I want to welcome you to this very special keynote. This keynote's a little bit different than some of the other ones that I have done because I'm getting a chance to tell a story. So I'm really excited. And it's not just one story, it's actually two stories that parallel one another. The stories go to the heart of applying the science of reading, but through the brain's back door. Why not the front, you ask? Why wouldn't we all want to go to the front door? It's probably quicker, it's probably fancier, probably easier to get to without a bunch of junk in the way like you might have in your backyard. But we're talking about the brain when we talk about front door, back door, and that's very different. And that leads us into something fascinating, which is early brain development, our ends. Where are our access points? What neuroscience leads us there? Where was this science before the awareness of this movement that is the science of reading? And I'm very happy to be piggybacking on Emily Hanford's keynote, which I had the privilege of watching just before I filmed this one, because I really wanted to take some points that I've heard her make in past presentations, and I wanted to pull on those threads because there's so many great similarities and so many jumping points, particularly one that I love the most: stay humble and stay curious. We're going to talk about that. We're actually going to wrap with that at the end as well, because that is a guiding force for everything in every context, but specifically when it comes to this topic, science of reading. How did we get here? Where did we come from? Where do we need to go? And what do we need to keep in mind to make sure we don't end up in a place that we didn't anticipate? Only if we know how we got where we are can we really make better decisions moving forward. If this leaves you wanting to know the how, the why, the when, the what, and the where, that's perfect, because you're going to have a big, giant meal of that in the session that you'll be able to access following this one. The first thing that I want to do before I go into this beginning of my story is show you where you can go at the end of this story, which is the Facebook group. There is a Facebook group. I started it a couple of years ago. It now has almost 135,000 educators from around the world. And what I really love about this group is if I were to be stuck on a desert island tomorrow, it would just keep on going without me at all. And it's because everybody in there takes these nuggets, these little access points. And these nuggets are the secret stories, these little connector pieces to make sense of what you're doing as you read and write across the day, that don't have to come in any particular order, that aren't subject to any sort of grade level wall, but instead can flow freely through everything that you're doing across all your content areas to make sense of the sounds letters make in words, even if those sounds or phonics skills haven't been formally introduced. So an example of one of these little nuggets for access would be a secret story like this one about T and H, the two letters that aren't supposed to sit together, because when they do, they never behave. They always stick out their tongues and go, and of course, that's the sound they make, which is why they're not allowed to sit together, but they don't listen, and you find them everywhere, always sticking their tongues out at each other and always making that sound. So this little nugget or access point for the code gives kids in kindergarten a way to read words that otherwise they would have to memorize until the skill's formally introduced in your program, your reading program or your phonics program. But teachers need tools to make sense of what they're doing right now, to feed information into what they're already doing and keep pace with the reading and the writing that's naturally a part of the course of the day. I've often said secret stories are the lifeblood that flows within the structure that is your program, the structure or the backbone of your course of action as a teacher, whatever your reading program is or your phonics program is. Programs have a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's a place you're supposed to be. There are things you're supposed to do. There's a process upon which they should occur. It is laid out. It is a script. It is like a Broadway show. Act 1, Act 2, intermission, Act 3, Act 4. Every grade level knows what they're doing, when it's supposed to happen, how it's supposed to look, and what's going to be done to make it occur. That is the backbone. The secrets are fluid. They're like the blood. They flow through and around and fill out all the space so that it never goes away. And by it, I mean the code. The secrets aren't something that you do before or after or ever instead of, because there's nothing to do with a secret. Secrets aren't something you do. They're something you use. You use them to make sense of what you are doing, which is your program. But as you'll see in what we're going to talk about today, and as you'll see several examples of in the group, as a matter of fact, thousands examples in the group, is that this looks differently depending on where you're doing it, with who you're doing it, when you're doing it, how you're doing it. These are little pieces you drop into your existing repertoire of expertise as a teacher. You have to make things your own in order for kids to make things their own. But we need the backbone of our program, especially now as we're learning more about the science of reading. And I say learning more, but a lot of this was known. A lot of this was known. You need the code to crack the code. How that looks, what we need to have happen, the structure of that basis, that's something that we really need to take heed of. But that doesn't mean that we can't give more sooner. As a matter of fact, all of the research shows, and that's part of what we're going to see today, is how important it is that we do give more sooner. Because without advanced access to the code, we aren't able to keep pace with the words kids are seeing every day in their actual reading program. The reading program can't even keep pace with the phonics skills in the words that are in the program. So we have to be able or be mindful of taking advantage of all of these opportunities that kids have across the entire instructional day. And that is where the secret stories become the blood that fill the crevices of this backbone structure that your program provides. So there's no harm in giving more sooner. Now, I've never done this before in a keynote. I have never told my personal story. I have talked about it in the group here and there for reasons you'll find out. But I haven't really talked about it in a formal way. And I certainly haven't talked about it as a story with a progression as a line to what we're seeing now in the educational landscape, specifically with reading. So my story starts with graduating. Well, it doesn't actually start with graduating, but if we're going to fast forward, it starts with graduating, but not from teacher college, from Juilliard. And my background was in voice and language. Now, little did I know at the time how incredibly important that would become in the age of phonics today. And I'll explain more about that too. So just hold that thought in the back of your head. But Juilliard, where we studied voice and language, that's where I got my bachelor's degree. We had to study German and Italian and French and English, believe it or not, because the focus of our language study was to perfect the sounds of these languages, to sing with a purity of sound that allowed the most resonance, the most beauty. Fast forward a bit to what my dream had also always been, which was to teach. My mom was a teacher. I lived in her classroom. She, like, by the way, I wanted to mention this, Emily Hanford, in her session, she mentioned her mother was a teacher, and her mother also did not study education as her primary course of study or field. I think that gives us an interesting perspective because we're not conditioned to accept what we see because we always think we might be missing something. And so we're driven to figure it out a little bit more if we're coming at education from an outside perspective. At least that was the case with me. So like Emily's mom, my mom was also a first grade teacher who then became a guidance counselor. So I thought that was really interesting too. So there's the parallel. I quickly became uninfatuated with touring, Broadway, even soap opera stuff. That kind of life in about the first 2 years was very nomadic, and I realized it was not at all for me. So I went back to what I thought was my kind of childhood love, which was teaching. And while I had a bachelor's from Juilliard, I went and got a master's in a dual course of certification for literacy, specifically early literacy. So literacy was, it took a little bit longer to get it, but that was a real key focus of mine because I struggled with reading in elementary school. And I do remember being in the classrooms where they were trying to make the groups and figure out who could read and who couldn't read and who really, really, really couldn't read. So you all start out together and then little by little, you know, your friends are getting moved to another classroom, but you're still there. And there's like, out of the 30 kids that started, now there are 12 of you because, you know, there are 4, let's say, first grade classrooms. So they're all shifting around as teachers are assessing. And then pretty soon out of the 12 of you, now there's only like 7 of you. And then there's only like 4 of you. And you're wondering like, where are all my friends? Where did everybody go? And then you start to realize as you're switching, you know, going to lunch or just moving back to your homeroom that they're all in these other classes. And a lot of them are in the same class. And you're over here with a lot of kids maybe you don't necessarily know from other classes. And there's so few of you. And you quickly get the idea that there's something different about you, about how you read, whatever this thing that reading is, because who knows what it is in first grade. It's a bunch of weird symbols with a bunch of sounds attached that are supposed to come together to do something, but they actually don't because you have too few of them to do anything with. So it's almost like a magic trick. Look over here, but don't look over here. That's how it felt as a kid to me. And then of course, there's no logical explanation for why anything does anything. So you just have to memorize it all, which wouldn't be so bad because I wasn't terrible at memorizing, but I was horrible at paying attention. Horrible. My attention span was and still is like this long. unless I know why I'm doing what I'm doing. And then I'm hyper-focused and I'm unstoppable. So I wasn't really good at doing something without knowing what I was doing or why I was doing it. And because we were learning these individual letter sounds, but then words weren't actually made up of individual letter sounds, they were made up of sounds letters make together. So even if I knew the huh and the ah and the what, I couldn't read the word how because I didn't have the ow sound, and I wouldn't for 2 more years. So it didn't make sense to me that I'm supposed to be learning all these individual sounds, but then when I get a book, I'm supposed to just be, I don't know, winging it, remembering what the words are, checking out the pictures. Now, so when I was in first grade, we had little phonics plaid workbooks, but even the phonics plaid workbooks started slow, started small, and took forever to amp up. So even with phonics, and that's still the case today, if you don't have a workaround, especially if you're not looking at the neuroscience and how it can help us move there. But it's still the case today in that the more structured you are, the slower you have to go. And the slower you go, the more you have to wait for enough pieces of the puzzle to put the thing together. In third grade, I was super behind. And then you add comprehension. We have to learn to read so that we're able to read to learn. So the more automatic the code is, the less focus you have to put, the less working memory is being used up to try to figure out the words, and the more you can relax and enjoy the meaning of what you're reading, but one comes before the other. And my attention span was horrible. Which didn't help because, again, the less something made sense and was meaningful, the less I had any interest in paying attention. So I used to be forced to sit outside and read, or inside and read when it was cold, for like an hour a day. And oh my gosh, I hated it, because the one thing that bad readers hate to do more than anything else is read. And that's sad, because the best way to become a good reader is to read. As a matter of fact, the only way to become a reader is to read. And the more you read, the better you get. And the better you get, the more you love to read. And the more you love to read, the better reader you are. So it's a cyclical progression, which we'll talk about as well. But the poor readers read less, and the less they read, the worse they get. And the worse they get, the less they want to have anything to do with it. And that was kind of me. So let's fast forward. I made it through. I ended up getting a master's in literacy, kind of because I was so interested in how this is supposed to look. Sadly, I didn't get much. I got one good alphabet song and was sent on my way. That's it. I didn't get any phonics, because by the time I went to college, it was in the early 90s, and phonics was the redheaded stepchild of the reading movement. But I assumed that whatever they taught me must be what I needed to know, even though I didn't feel like I knew anything. And so when I was locked in a room with a bunch of kids, a bunch of 5-year-olds, and given a piece of chalk and a book and said, here, get them learning those letters, get them learning how to read. Now, we didn't really have to teach reading, to be honest, in kindergarten, which was the grade I started in. But we did have to teach letter sounds. So I thought, well, okay, there's a lot of ways to do that with music. That'll be fun. And at the time, letter of the week was the way to go. And of course, we weren't in any hurry, because why would you need to be in a hurry if you're not going to teach them to read anyway, right? The world's your oyster. Kick back and spend all week on a bee. Who cares? Like, that was the mindset. I'm not saying it was my mindset. I'm saying it was the mindset. Until a parent whose child already knew their letters and sounds had a conference with me, my first year, kindergarten, and said, Madison already knows all of her letters and sounds, and so I think she's really ready to start reading, but she can't seem to do it. Can you help? Now, all I knew about the next step, which was reading, is, okay, we have to blend those sounds and listen for the word. So I said, with all authority, well, if Madison she needs to make those sounds, and while she's making those sounds, if she can just make them kind of quickly in a smooth way, she'll be able to hear the word. That was what I said. So, of course, Madison, who's a little too smart for her own good, she comes to the board, and I will never forget this. She goes, "Fla-awa-er." And I said, okay, so see, there's the problem. Madison's making these sounds, but they're disjointed. So Madison needs to be able to go a little faster, and then she'll be able to hear the word. So Madison, without missing a beat, goes, "Fla-awa-er." She did exactly what I just said she was supposed to do, and none of the 3 of us heard any semblance of a word in what she did. There's no way she could have gone faster. Like, she went as fast as she possibly could, and "fla-awa-er" is not the word. So I had absolutely no idea what to say next. I had no idea. I thought, that's a really good question. What do we do now? So this kind of stuck with me, and I brought it up at some grade level meetings, and I had a wonderful group of kindergarten teachers, but they were all like I was going to say they're all old, but they're all younger than I am now. So they were like in their 40s. And I remember at the grade meeting, this came to a head, because I'd been asking and poking and nudging about, like, how do we how do we get kids reading? What do we do with these? And they were just like, you don't have to worry about that. It's not even developmentally appropriate. Just practice those sounds. And I'm like, how do we even practice the sounds? Because none of the words are able to be read with the sounds because there are too many sounds that letters make, like in the word flower or house. So how do you even practice them unless you just stop everything, split them all apart, and just keep practicing the letters by themselves? They're like, yes, that's what you do. Here's what changed everything, at least for me. Didn't change everything for them, which was weird. Drop everything and read and drop everything and write, except our requirement was we had to do it for 60 minutes a day. 30 minutes, drop everything, read. 30 minutes, drop everything and write. We were in kindergarten. Now, leaving 5-year-olds for 30 minutes to do something you know they can't do twice is a real test of faith, because you're going to lose all control of those kids. You give them one book and a towel and put them on the floor for 30 minutes, they're going to come up with everything you could possibly do with that book and that towel that has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with reading. And the same thing's going to happen when they write, except with writing, at least they can just try to draw a picture or something, but they're not supposed to. They're supposed to do what we call writing, at least, because writing means it's part writing, part drawing. But if they actually don't know how to write anything, how do you keep that going? So I was desperate at this point. I had no idea what to do, because now every day was going to be like the meeting with Madison. Every day I've got to engage kids in an activity that I already know they cannot do. And when I asked this question at our meeting, I said, well, your kids don't read, right? So what are you going to do for the 30 minutes? Or if they don't write, what are you going to do? They're like, well, they're just going to feel what it would be like if they could. That sounded more like a drama class at Juilliard, like an improv class. Feel what it would be like if you were a flower, and then show me what you would look like as the rain fell. Like that, it sounded really interesting as a drama exercise, but not as something that we were supposed to do for an hour a day. It made absolutely no sense to me whatsoever. And no one else was fazed, which told me I was weird. Like that was like, I'm missing something. So I thought, well, maybe it's because it's kindergarten. So I went and I started looking stuff up. In fact, I went to first grade and said, I need your reading books. I need your reading series. I need to see where it tells me how to read the word flower. And I'm searching through these whole language reading series. I think at the time we had Harcourt, something from Harcourt, maybe. I honestly can't remember, but Harcourt rings a bell. And I went through that whole pink thing, which was the first grade series. Not a thing. It kept saying things like, have kids read the passage on page 8 and then answer the questions, or have kids read the activity on page 9 and then write about a time that this happened to them. But nowhere did it say how to read the passage or how to write the words. Nowhere. So I thought, well, maybe it's in second grades. Maybe second grades where the secrets lie. So I went to second grade and I got their green version. And I went through all of the 4, because, each grade level has multiple books in the reading series. I go through all of them. Same thing, like have kids read these questions and answer them. Have kids read this story and, identify the author's purpose. Still didn't tell me how they were supposed to read any of it. I was so confused. I just thought there must be another part of this book that the school didn't get that we're supposed to have, because no one in the whole school is going to be able to teach anyone how to read, at least not using anything here. I was so perplexed. So I called a very old teacher. I saw her name in the newspaper, and she was teaching special needs students how to read. And that teacher gave me a book, and it looked a little bit like this book. It was gigantic. And in that book were more rules than my little ADD brain could ever keep track of. But then what really confused me were that there were exceptions that oftentimes outnumbered the rule they applied to. So there might be this infrequent rule, like applied to 4 multisyllabic words that kids who can't read would never see, typically at the early grades. And those 4 words that satisfied the rule, there'd be 7 exceptions to the 4 words that had the rule. And I have to learn it first. And I was like 23. But once I learn it, how the heck am I going to teach it to them? Like, they're eating their foot. How am I going to do that? How am I going to translate whatever phonics knowledge I have and activate it for use with a 5-year-old? Like, they are the end user of this instruction. So it's not about whether I can learn it. I mean, obviously I need to learn it, but then what really matters is, what are you going to do to teach it to them? Because that's where the what is it? The rubber meets the road. That's where the rubber meets the road, not what you can do, what you can get kids to do. So I was just perplexed. I thought, well, you have to have the code to crack the code. So now I understand why my kids can't read, because there's all these other patterns of sound that we can't account for with these individual letters. And I did know enough to know that you have to have the code to crack the code. And I'll explain how I knew that. I knew that because, and you'll see a picture of it. Actually, let's see if I can show you a picture of it. Well, I can't without showing you something else I don't want you to see yet. But when I was very young, there was a Long John Silver's decoding ring. And you had to have this decoding ring in order to crack the code of these messages that you would get with your fish and French fries. And I got in trouble on the night that I was supposed to get my decoding ring. And this decoding ring was a really big deal because they only offered the ring like once. And then you had to have it for the season to be able to read these messages. So I never got the ring. I actually had a sitter who that night did let me get the ring, but then my mom found out I got the ring. And so I got massively punished. And the biggest part of the punishment was she took away the ring, which to this day, I still remember. I've actually looked the ring up on eBay and I've considered buying it just because I wanted it so badly. But what really drove me crazy is I couldn't decode any of these Long John Silver secret messages because they were all in Liturgy block without the code. The code ring is what gave me a way to understand, oh, this symbol is this sound. And then using that, I could piece together the words. But you're totally at loss without the ring. So I felt like the ring was in this book. So I have to figure out how to get this ring. And then I've got to make 25 of them for these kids. Now, this problem sets up a parallel scenario where we are with literacy in terms of this landscape. And the best way to, I think, really see this, and I saw this in a few blog posts. One in particular was, I think, in Pam Snow's blog post. And she's a prolific writer on science of reading and a real forward thinker in all things that are literacy instruction. But I think there's more to dig into. And so I want to share this with you, and then I want to share it in reverse. The gist of Chesterton's fence is that fences don't grow out of the ground. They're not flowers. They don't just pop up out of nowhere. And people don't build fences in their sleep or in a fit of madness. They're built by people who plan them out for a certain purpose. They have reasons behind that thinking, and they believe they would be a good thing for someone to do something. Like they are built for a reason. Fences exist for a reason. They're not just built for fun and fancy. So the moral of this principle is that before we remove a fence, we should always pause long enough to ask, why was it here in the first place? Like before I just take away this piece of something that I think is superfluous and pointless, somebody put it there for a reason. Maybe I should figure that out first before I just knock it down. Now, this parable is always mentioned in conjunction with phonics because the phonics fence was knocked down before I went to grad school. Was knocked down, obliterated, taken out of reading instruction. The problem is Chesterton's fence is looking at one side of the fence. Let's go back and look at the other side because the same thing applies in both directions. Just like people don't build fences in their sleep, they don't tear them down in their sleep either. I mean, it takes a lot of work to tear down a fence. So I'm not going to spend my Saturday knocking a fence over unless I have a real problem with that fence. Like I believe that fence is a problem. It is an issue. It is causing something bad. It is blocking access for a purpose that I think is important. So that's what would get me all up and bothered to knock a fence down. People who knock fences down have reasons often, not always. Some people are just vandals, but most people, if you take the time to take something out of a well thought out plan, or you want to remove something that's in your way, usually you have reasons. So I argue that if we don't take the time to understand the reasoning and rationale behind why the phonics fence was torn down, we could run the risk of repeating similar mistakes that caused its demise in the first place. Now, just sit with that for a minute. It's just assumed that the phonics fence was torn down because we wanted child-centered teaching and whole language was much more playful and whimsical and open-ended and easier. And that all is true. That's definitely what I'm not going to say it's true factually, but it's true that people thought that at the time. It was a more free-flowing fancy. The problem is, if we dig a little further, there had to be more. Like we didn't get rid of math, and that's not whimsical and playful. So like why? Why phonics? Like what was the burr in everybody's saddle? What was it that so many thoughtful and we have to assume as educators that down the generations, we all care about kids. We all want success. We're not doing things on purpose to cause problems. We're not vandals just knocking fences over for no purpose. We're always doing something for the betterment of what we see is the need, which are our kids. So what was in their head? Why was it so important to get rid of something that at face value seems like the most important, which is the code that you need to crack the code? Why was it knocked down? Well, here's what I heard. Here was the word on the street at the time that I was in grad school. Too many rules to learn, too many exceptions, too abstract, developmentally totally not appropriate. I mean, these are concrete thinkers, and we're trying to give them all these abstract skills, symbols that denote sounds in words when they don't even know what a word is. It's not fun. It's too hard for kids to learn. Oh, and it just takes way too long for them to be able to read anything if we have to teach them all of the code, because it takes 3 to 4 grade level years just to access the whole code. And you can't wait that long to read. We need to start reading in kindergarten when we drop everything and read, even though we can't read anything, no matter what we drop, because we don't have the code we need to read it. But that was the logic. That's the logic. And so the equivalent of that to me in my little performing arts head was, oh, I get it. It's like putting on the worst show for the worst audience. It's like that Wednesday matinee for all the older people at 2 o'clock who can't hear well. And so they don't laugh at anything and they can't see and they're not getting the jokes. So there's no energy in the room. It's literally like the worst show for the worst audience. That to me identified what the problem was in terms of the thinking and the rationale behind the decision to obliterate phonics. And therein lies the reason that phonics became a dinosaur and went extinct for a while, to the point where if you were teaching phonics, which I'll explain to you how I got back into the groove with my flower example, but if you were teaching phonics, you had to do it underground. You had to hide it. You couldn't let anybody know you were doing it. I actually had an administrator who's later come to me, and it meant the world because she told me how wrong she was when I was doing a training at their district. But at the time, I was just a teacher. This is my second year. So I was really full board now teaching phonics, but I was doing it in a way that's upside down and backwards, which I'll explain. And she actually told me when she came to observe, and I was so excited because all the kids could read and write all the words, and I was even letting them call on each other so she could see that there was no rhyme or reason as to who got picked. Because I wanted her to see it doesn't matter who the kid is, it doesn't matter what the word is, they own building blocks, they can put them together. Some are a little faster, some are a little slower, but any kid can do it. Let's watch this. And she literally said after my assessment, or my observation, she said, oh, couldn't you just compare pumpkins like the rest of the kindergarten teachers? And my heart was broken because I couldn't wait for her to see what the kids could do because I was so beyond thrilled with what the kids could do. And the idea that she wanted me to just not do it. She didn't say, don't teach them to read, but she said it all with that huffy breath of, oh, couldn't you just compare pumpkins like the rest of the kindergarten is? And her reasoning was, when I said, are you saying you don't want me to teach them how to read? She said, well, if you do, can you just not put it, like, just don't put anything in any newsletters. Like, don't put anything about like the secret they learned this week, or like ask them to hear the sound, the secret, we call them secrets, not phonics patterns, because that was our secret code, because we couldn't call it phonics anywhere because phonics was outlawed. So the secret was like, ask your child to hear the secret in the word how. Ask them the secret about the 2 letters that always get hurt. Play rough and get hurt and go, ow. And they're in the words that we are going to be learning next week, so that we didn't have to memorize our sight words, how, now, flower, around. Instead, the kids could just know, oh, UNOW, play really rough. And somebody always gets hurt and says, ow. I'm flying overhead of them is superhero O. He's their all-time favorite superhero ever. If he ever flies by, they'll stop dead in their tracks, no matter what they're doing, because they love him. And they'll go, oh, 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 oh. He's their favorite superhero. And that is their default sound. So if the word isn't how and the word is slow, kids are armed and ready with the next most likely default. So I would put little things like that in my newsletter. But the problem was, if a kid dropped one and another parent found it, then they go banging on the door saying, why isn't my child learning this, that, and the other? So I used to joke. It was like, okay, it's like an undercover operation. It's a secret operation. Because in the days that this started, it was a secret operation. You were not allowed to teach phonics. My administrator was nicer than most because she didn't stop me. She just let me know how problematic it would be if other parents found out and started comparing what was happening, not just in their kindergarten classroom, but OUOW is a 2nd grade phonics skill. So when a kindergartner is telling their 2nd grade sibling how to spell the words on their spelling list, that freaks parents out. And if they happen to have twins or triplets, like a lot of parents do in different classrooms, boy, oh boy, does that cause administrator problems. And that was what it was about. But the good part was, what I realized when it comes to this word flower, here's my little magic decoder ring, by the way. What I realized is I could bring these sounds alive by connecting them to something that made sense. And to me, if we look for the least common denominator that everybody can connect or attach to, it's feelings, emotions, and behaviors. And maybe the drama background with Juilliard helped a little bit with that, but I'll tell you what helped the most we learned the IPA, which was the International Phonetic Alphabet. Now, we did not learn it for phonics to learn how to read, not at all, because that's not what it was for, not even close. It's actually for something that it wasn't even used. We didn't even use it for its real purpose. Its real purpose is for perfect production and articulation of sound, and a sound symbol coding that allows you to code the sound in its purest form. So speech pathologists, this is their holy Bible. We at Juilliard use the IPA as a cheat because we had to sing in every language that we were required to study, these Romance languages. And all of these sounds could be streamlined. All these different languages, all of the sounds in these different languages could be streamlined if you funneled them into the IPA. So we could hone ownership of this one code, this IPA, and we could use it to transcribe all of the other languages that we had to study, so that when we were going to sing in a language, we sounded like a native singer, whether it was German or French or Italian or even English, the code was the same above those words. So it gave us this perfect ability to connect with all of these languages with so many moving parts that would be overwhelming, because we only had 4 years in our undergrad, 4 languages, 4 years. Even though English is a given, you still have to study just as much in English diction because you're still using the IPA. And it's all about being able to sing in those languages. So it was a godsend to have a way to streamline all of that into one manageable piece that you could just hone that. So what I did was I just simply took the concept of the IPA, which is one set of code-based symbols that everything kind of defaults into. I aligned those phonics rules in that big giant book with behaviors. Why would they say this? What would make this sound? What might they do if this didn't work? Like if they didn't say ow because they got hurt, why would they stop? Why would they stop roughhousing? What makes kids stop roughhousing? What makes kids stop doing what they're not supposed to on the playground? Well, when somebody important comes by, like the principal or the teacher, that'll get them to stop pretty quick if they see them. So the reason that this has to be a superhero vowel is a different reason, and that goes to another rule, which are these vowels, and the vowels have powers that no other letters have. They have the potential to do things other letters can't do. If there's something going on or something wrong, they're most likely behind it in some way. Just like Batman is almost always involved in something that's going on in Gotham City. So everything is intertwined, but everything is consistent and logical and grounded in what kids already know and understand, even if they're only 4 or 5. It's part of the base knowledge that all kids have, even if they don't speak English, they have it. Now, what that does, when we use behaviors to ground rules, we can make the sounds more predictable, even when they're the next most likely sound. Instead of being an exception, black, white rule exception, it's most likely behavior, but if not, he probably feels like doing this. You can't do that with a rule. With a rule, it is supposed to be this. And if it's not, well, it doesn't work. And then you just have to memorize the exceptions. But a behavior is different because we do things for different reasons, but those reasons can still be predictable as long as there's a thinking construct that makes sense, that we can mirror our thinking through, or that we can navigate our decision-making with. It's kind of like an emotional rudder. It drives your behavior, doing the right thing, being honest, helping someone that needs help. And the behavior is the same for everybody that has that emotional experience. So that's the fabric that binds us, the universal framework of human understanding and behavior, even 5-year-olds. So tying the big book of phonics back to these code-based behaviors was the beginning of the secret stories. And stories are basically involved, and it bugs me a little. I know it shouldn't, but it bugs me a little when it is assumed that stories are the special thing. It's not about the story. The stories are just the best capsule to connect what they already know with the letter pattern. Stories are just a good delivery system, but the story isn't the focus. If this were stories about aardvarks and anteaters getting together with Farmer Fred and Harry the Hippo, and that's why PH says, like, stories can be more confusing than the phonics skill, depending on the story. And for someone like me with ADD, you say squirrel, I'm over there. So like stories can, take me all over the place. I use stories for the purpose of creating an easily accessible framework for memory reconstruction, specifically with kids who don't know what the memory's for yet. They don't have the readiness to even need the skill yet because they're still learning the individual letters too. So why do I need an ow? Yes, I can understand that it says ow because I already know what I say when I get hurt. Ow! The only thing I don't know is what does that. And that's why this visual is so important, this embedded mnemonic. But stories are the best way to organize random bits of data, because first we have to sort that data into recognizable pieces. Then we want to arrange it in some kind of an order so that it makes sense. Now we have to present them visually. And this is especially important when the other half of what's so important to learn is purely visual and abstract. Not only do we have to have the sound learned, we have to have the pattern learned, and then we have to connect which sound goes with which pattern. We don't have to do any of those things if we connect back to an existing schema, which is what you say when you get hurt. Ow! And then we represent it looking exactly like we would expect. So now kids can see this, and it prompts or triggers them to make the sound, which is ow. Or if they hear the sound ow in a word they're trying to write, like how, they can look up at the wall and identify the culprit that makes it. Now, will they know which one does what in which word? Not at the beginning, because they don't have text experience yet, but they're 2 years ahead just in having access. What will help them know which one does what in which word? By reading. How will they get to read it? Because they can. If they have this, they can actually read. Reading is the best and fastest way to fine-tune spelling, especially if they're doing it 2 years before, because now we have this compounded interest. Now, once I start to see use, sure, I would definitely let them know, hey, you know which one of these is most likely at the end of the word? It's the OW. Not always, but mostly. So you can always fine-tune as you go, but first you want to go. It's like riding a bike. You don't want to talk to kids about how to ride the bike till they get on the bike. And then they're there. And as they're pedaling, that's the best way to learn how to balance, how to steer, how to stop. But first you got to get on the bike and get that bike moving. So we have data in random bits, like that big giant phonics book, sorted. The book was sorted. It was sorted into phonics skills, but I wanted to sort it as reasons for behaviors that ended in sounds. I wanted to arrange those reasons so they made sense. Like first they were roughhousing, then they stopped because of this. I wanted to put a visual connection there to do the heavy lifting for kids so that they would know which patterns did what. It's easy for them to map the sound because it's an automatic response to what they already know. Ow! Or this one, what they already know. Or this one, what they already know. But what's not easy, what's not accessible early on independently is which letters do that. And so that's where these embedded mnemonics are critical. They have to be able to see them, to use the sound, to find the sound they need to read the word her, or to identify the letter pattern they need to spell it. And they can go in both directions. And finally, all this comes together in an explanation with a story. And you see that pretty little Lego house at the bottom. So that was the method to the madness. Now, the thing is, though, remember when I said it's a little frustrating for me when someone's like, oh, I get it. It's a cute little silly story. No, these are cute little silly stories, but they're good, better, and best stories. Now, I'm not faulting this program. I'm not even going to name the program. I'm only using it as an example of what I call an irrational mnemonic, meaning there's no rhyme or reason and there's no logic behind it that would allow kids to predict the sounds using what they already know. These would have to be practiced and memorized just like the words that you would apply them to. There's a reason. It's not just that this publisher wanted to make things hard. It's because they were stuck. They were stuck because they used stories to teach the individual letter sounds. And therein lies the hole that you find yourself in. If you use stories to teach the individual letter sounds, you have individual letter characters. How are you going to explain why random and disconnected letter characters come together to do something that causes a sound that's highly logical? Now, if you don't understand what I'm saying, you will when I read this to you, because these are the stories. There are 7 stories kids have to know to be able to replicate the same mapping of this sound symbol relationship, which is you see this, you go, you hear the sound, you easily identify the culprit. A 4-year-old could do that. A 4-year-old could do that. You don't even need to know the letters. And a 4-year-old could see this and scooch across the floor pretending to be a car. Or if you scooch across the floor going, they could point to the ones that are doing that in the picture. That is the beginning of orthographic mapping. But alternatively, there are 7 stories that one would have to learn this way. And these are 2nd grade stories, by the way. That's when this is presented. Eddie the Elephant and Red Robot. Now, those are the individual letter characters in the individual stories for the letters, which kids have to do first. And there are 26 of those before they're allowed to start these, which now cause those letters to come together. And that is why we have we have 7 total stories. So we have Eddie the Elephant and Red Robot. And when they come together, their story is this. They become Ernest Ernest steals elephants, and as he runs off, he shouts his last name, Impy, ink, plus red robot. Irving steals ink bottles and proudly reports his catch by saying his last name. Urgent steals umbrellas and reports back to his ringleader, Red Robot, with his last name. Now that's super cool. And as a kid in first grade who couldn't read well, I would be captivated by acting out those stories. I would have no earthly idea what in the world they had to do with the R-controlled vowel sound. None whatsoever. Even by second grade, I wouldn't understand. Even as my age, I don't understand what those have to do with the R-controlled vowel sound, other than that's one rigmarole way to get to the sound, but with absolutely no rational connection. Nothing that would give kids a leg up before they've even learned the story to already know what the sound is. And if the goal of phonics is to map these sound symbol connections in the brain, to forge these sound symbol connections, so when you see these letters, you go, when you see these letters, you go, when you see these letters, you go, ow. If the goal is that automaticity and speed, both for reading and for writing, you got a lot of work to do before this will be automatic. One could even argue, and one actually does, which you'll see a little bit later, and it's actually the program itself, that these would be really hard to learn. And for some kids, they won't learn them very easily. And it's actually easier just to memorize the phonics pattern. Now that's where I find stories to be a little bit of a wild goose chase. And that's why I guess I don't like seeing, I mean, it's silly to say, I don't want to describe secret stories as stories. That sounds ridiculous. But I guess I should have named them better, because the story is only the package they live in. And what's important is what lives in the package. And what lives in the package is something kids already know, a behavior they already do, because the letter behavior mirrors kid behavior so that they can navigate in words they've never seen before the most likely sounds of the letters that are in them. And they can fast track more of the code faster. So they have it all of it in kindergarten. They don't have to wait. Doesn't mean they're all using it proficiently. It means they've got access to it like a buffet. Nobody's starving waiting for the waitress and only having a bologna sandwich. They may only want a bologna sandwich, but the world is their oyster on the buffet. And we are using the buffet and eating from it every single day in math, in social studies, in science. Everywhere and anywhere there are words. We are looking for secrets to try to make sense of those words. The secrets are our glasses. They're not something we do. They're something we use to do what we're doing. Impy and umbrella and earnest is something you do. You have to do that. You have to practice that. You have to repeat that. You have to reinforce that. You could forget that. Like, you have to do that. There are 7 total stories to get each of the individual sounds plus the sounds for each of those R-controlled vowels, as opposed to just one secret story. Now, if you're wondering, but what about the individual sounds then? How are you teaching those? If you're not using stories for the individual sounds, how are you teaching them? But remember, I said secret stories isn't really about stories. It's about how to take advantage of what they've already got, what they already know, what's already developed in the brain, and use that as our in. Well, that's what we do for individual sounds. And you're going to hear a lot more about this in the actual in the actual workshop special session part of the keynote that is not this one. It's muscle memory. It's muscle memory through a melodic mnemonic. In the Better Alphabet song, it's really not one song. It's like 26 mini songs that start over on every letter sound combination, so that kids can pop right into the letter they need and the sound pops out. And it pops out because it's connected to the letter name, which is all part of this melodic mnemonic. It's a way to control the next utterance of sound. You can use the letter name to automate its sound. And then we start over with the next one and over with the next one. And for the letters that have more than one sound, like long and short vowels, or hard and soft C, or hard and soft G, that also is sung in the most likely order. So that when kids go to attack C, they sing C says, but it can also say. So the first thing that their lips, tongue, and teeth take them through is the most likely sound, because we put it in on purpose that way. The next sound that they're going to pop out with, without trying, will be the soft sound, because that's the backup sound to try. So therein lies the fastest way. And not only is it the easiest, it's the fastest. It takes 2 weeks to 2 months. That's it. Over, done, finished, the end. Even if they're 3 or 4. And I say 3, and I know I'm going to get a lot of pushback for that, because I don't think you should grab a 3-year-old and teach them all their letter sounds for a purpose. But the sounds of our language are great songs to sing. I mean, you'll watch their mouth mimicking your mouth. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But it's really like singing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. We're controlling the next utterance of sound with that came before it. You sing it twice a day, every day, and it just locks in those sounds. So much more about that in the actual keynote. I want to move on, because what I want to show you is how you don't have to memorize things that you know. So back to that word flower, and I'm going to let a 3rd-day kindergartner explain the R-control phonics pattern that she's not supposed to get in her reading program until 2nd grade. But there's no harm in giving her earlier access now. And the reason is she has to read the word her. That's one of her sight words that otherwise she'd have to call a heart word and just memorize. She'll have to read the word sure and were and circle. Those would have to just be heart words that she'd have to put on the long list of words to memorize unless she has access to the code she needs to read them, which she can and she will, because you as a teacher don't have to have your hands shackled when you're doing something right now in the moment that kids need the skill to do. Then when it comes up in second grade, yay, awesome, check the box, we're good to go. We have deep ownership of that. We've been using it to read and write for 2 years.
Hi kids, do you want to know about the secrets about these? So ERIRUR, when they get together, they hop in their cars, they drive crazy, and they say, "Arr, arr, arr, arr." Yeah, so what they do, drive in their cars crazy. But when you grow up, you don't do that. Okay?
She even threw a public service announcement in there at the end. That's how deep the connections go with responsible driving with this little girl. And I think it's because she had some family members who had some lectures, maybe an older brother. But here we go back to this word flower. Now I can explain it. There's a blend. There's something called Beethoven blends. You can see those on YouTube or in the other special session, long session that you're going to be able to watch. You'll be able to see and click on a link to watch those, but they automate the sounds of the blends so that kids can go quickly from the blend letters to the blend sound and back and forth for reading, writing. So that's our flip. Ow helps me explain flower. And then no longer is it fala. Thank goodness. And I don't have to worry about the ow sound because, again, if you know what to say when you get hurt, you're going to know what to say when you see the OU and the OW. And I just went backward. Now, evidence base. Embedded mnemonics are actually the highest performing mnemonic in terms of the research that's been done for student acquisition of sound symbol associations. Research found that embedded mnemonics reduce the amount of repetition needed for kids to learn the letters and sounds, less confusion, better long-term memory, greater ability to transfer, and apply this knowledge in reading and spelling. Now, when I talked about irrational mnemonics, I gave you those few examples of the ers, but let's just look at a few of these others from the same program. For WH, the witch hits Harry the Hat Man, and you don't know that he's Harry the Hat Man because they didn't call him Harry the Hat Man here, but that's one I do know is he's Harry the Hat Man. That's how they teach H. So the witch hits the man in the hat so he doesn't make any noise. I'm not totally sure why he doesn't make noise, but he doesn't. Okay, so then we have AW. From his salty water wells, Walter Walrus splashes Annie Apple's face. She complains, oh, that's awful. Now, AU isn't even talked about at all for whatever the reason may be, but you're going to see a little bit later on a really fast way to knock out both AU and AW with no walruses and no apples needed. For OY, this is one story. There's another story for OI, but both of those stories actually are combining what are 4 other stories. So for OI, you'd need a total of 6 stories, but this is one of the 6. The boy called Roy shouts oi as he plays leapfrog with Yo-Yo Man. See what I mean? Like I might as well just give you like 10 random words and see if you can tell me those words back, like on an IQ test. And then those words lead to something that you're actually trying to do something else with. Like it's 3 generations removed from the goal of the game, which is I need to read the word toy. Like how does that come together? Quarrelsome queen never goes in a word without her umbrella to protect her long, beautiful hair. My mom likes umbrellas for her hair. And if I were in first grade, that's the first thing I'd raise my hand to say is my mom uses an umbrella because she doesn't like to get her hair wet. And now I'm thinking about my mom and I'm thinking about if it's going to rain and I'm wondering if we're going to go to the mall. Like that's where my little brain would go. And then back to Irving. Now here's the kicker. And it's the reason I'm showing you this because it's going to go in the opposite direction of what you're going to see is so important in just a second. This is from the program specific to the assessment. Once these skills have been taught, these are skills that are not taught until first and second grade, respectively, in the program because it's grade specific. You will want to avoid continuing to move children through units who don't show mastery week after week. For these children, you want to make use of the intervention plan on page 257, 258. Now, what really kills me about this is if I don't understand these stories, I need intervention. Like, I would think whoever wrote these stories might want to go to intervention because clearly these connections, these associations are illogical. They're not just improbable, they're impossible. None of it goes with any of it. Like it doesn't make any sense. And to punish a child, and I won't use the word punish, but to withhold access to more of the code. Perhaps there's a story that child would understand. Like he may not understand Walter the walrus, but who knows? Maybe the QU with the umbrella and the pretty hair might strike a chord. Like, I don't know. Like it's a crapshoot at this point. Throw it all against the wall. Maybe something's going to stick, but you can't just say no more for you now until you learn about Walter Walrus. We're not going to tell you about, I don't know, Roy and Oi. Like, what if I need to read the word boy? What if I need to use the boys' bathroom? Like, I need the code. I need as much as I can have as soon as I can have it, because you're going to tell me to drop everything and read or to drop everything and write, and I don't know how to read or write. And I'm not going to know if you only give me 5 things, none of which make any sense, and then I don't give that back to you, and now you're stopping at those 5, and I don't get to have number 6 or number 7 or number 8. Like, these things aren't connected. I would argue that you could or could not know about Walty Walrus and could or could not grasp the quarrelsome queen. They're not interrelated. It's not math. It's not like division and you have to know how to multiply before you can divide. These are totally unrelated, completely disconnected, and all highly illogical connections or associations. So throw some of them at me. Maybe something will work. And that's one more than I had yesterday. Like, if anything, it should be give them more faster if they're going to be this difficult, because 9 out of 10 of them aren't going to work. So maybe, if you give them 10, you'll get lucky. One will strike. It killed me that the kids are the ones being blamed, I guess, for not getting it when they're not gettable. Like, they're just not gettable. If anything, and I don't mean to criticize like this. This is always the case when you're using existing stories to then come together to make other stories about which those individual stories have no connection. You're always stuck between a rock and a hard place. So I empathize with whoever had to come up with anything to make sense of what in the world Irving did with the red robot that would make them say Like, I get how impossible. It's like a game that you'd play on Saturday night. Like, do it. Maybe you'll come up with some that'll work even better. But like, it's hard, and it's not the child's fault. And what you'll see on the next slide is how critical it is to have more sooner. It's and not on the next slide, but almost soon. So if we jump back to where we are today, where we are in the process of rebuilding this phonics fence, science of reading and the research on how the brain learns to read is guiding our path. But what it isn't doing is putting a spotlight on this other equally important point, which isn't just how the brain learns to read, it's how the brain actually learns. It's actually the name of my Facebook group, where science of reading meets science of learning, because the neuroscience, particularly that on early brain development, tells us everything. What systems are up and running? What systems are not at all accessible yet? What is already primed and ready to go? Where are kids in the know, and where are some kids totally locked out? Like, what requires auditory processing and discrimination and cognitive processing and working memory that they don't have yet, those underdeveloped brain centers? And what other kind of learning can we use, or what other areas of already earlier developed capability can we target? That's where we could dig deeper into this research on early brain development. And that's what's going to make all the difference, because this distinction between how we learn to read and how the brain learns to read and how the brain actually learns is a critical distinction when you consider that our end user is likely 5 years old and eating his shoe. So phonics does not have to be hard. We make it hard. In fact, sometimes I think we make it so hard. I found this online, and I tried to take out anything that would be identifying, but it is commonplace for what I see all the time. We had a particularly interesting discussion about the Y in both Riley and Katia's name. The Y in Riley is represented by the IPA. There's that International Phonetic Alphabet we were talking about. Riley is represented by the IPA symbols, AI. Why do 2 symbols represent 1 letter? Then we pronounced those symbols and realized in vocalizing the letter that our mouth begins in one position but ends in another. It's not a huge difference, but we all noticed that our mouth closed a bit toward the end of the pronunciation. I told them they had just experienced a vowel glide. While we were gliding from one IPA symbol to another, as we pronounced the Y in Riley's name, we compared that to the Y in Katia's name, which was represented by the IPA symbol J. 1 letter, yet 2 very different pronunciations. And it didn't even talk about Y saying I. The thing that I have a problem with, I guess, is what was it for? What was it for? Does it help them spell or read words? Is the vocabulary being used for the purpose of moving toward reading and writing? Because it sounds more like what we would hear in a class on speech pathology, and articulation and mouth position and diagnosing abnormalities in speech production. It sounds clinical to me, but it doesn't sound first grade to me. The same teacher had written, I have this poster on the wall in my room. It will be fun waiting for the first students to try to pronounce this line of IPA. Can you do it? Now, the weird line of randomness that you see below is not randomness. That is the IPA, and those symbols are representing all of the sounds in the words that you see in the above strip. A word spelling represents its meaning. And so that is what kids are going to read. They're going to spend their time trying to figure that out. And again, for what? Like, you're coding the code now. So not only do you have the original code they have to crack, which is the English code, now they're using the International Phonetic Alphabet code to code the sounds that are in the other code that they haven't learned yet. And we've got, from a kindergarten teacher's perspective, you've got a nightmare. You've got letters that are intentionally backward looking or upside down. And they're supposed to be, because in the IPA, that is how some are represented. But in actual English, we spend forever in kindergarten and first grade turning letters right side up and flipping them around. So to ingrain those connections, and to what purpose? That's the thing. Even if there are structural or speech abnormalities or auditory processing delays, using high-level abstract terminology is not the best, fastest route to connect with that learner that is having that issue. There are reasons that it exists. I am in love with the IPA, but that's not what this is about, which is what reminded me of this commercial that I just had to play, because she just nails how I felt when I first saw this application.
I'd unfriend you.
That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works.
I just had to play it. But I really don't understand its application at the earliest possible grade levels, specifically to decoding and encoding. I do understand its application for sound production when needed, but even then, I think at the level that it's being discussed, it's confusing a lot of people who think the goal of the game is kind of along the lines of what I'm seeing here. And there's so much to be done. There's so much of the code that's needed. And there's so many opportunities for repetition and reinforcement, but not if we're detouring off to a place to go in a direction for a purpose that isn't to get kids reading and to get kids writing on that path when it comes to decoding the word how. I don't need to know there's a diphthong in the word how. I don't need to know that that's a diphthong. All I need to know is how to map, and I don't even need to know how to map, because you don't know how to map. It occurs because you have forged these sound symbol connections in the brain through repetition. So when I see this, I want to go, ow. And when I say ow, I want to instantly identify which letters do that. That's the goal of the game, to use that to read and to use that to spell and to build the pathway as a reader. Like that's the immediate goal. That is the fast path. So I do find myself wondering sometimes, like, how did we get here? Where am I? How did this happen? Like, people will be so worried about, how do we code the word me? It's like, why does it matter? Read the word me. They know the M sound. They know the E is either going to use the superpowers and say E, or it's going to be short and lazy, use a short and lazy disguise and go, pretend he can't hear. So one or the other, you can just read it and then move. Like, it's, don't stop to go backward. Like, if you have what you need, if you know kids' first course of attack is going to get the word, you're good to go. Move, like, go. Reading the word me, reading the word thee, all these words are so simple. And so I think that goes back to what I said at the beginning, which is when you make phonics rules into behaviors, everything becomes much easier because you can logically deduce the next most likely thing to try. But when it's a rule exception, you hear things like, well, yes, but that won't work because the fact is that, like, thee, you have a schwa sound at the end because that's an unstressed sound. And so you have to say the, and we can't pronounce it thee because we pronounce the word the. It doesn't matter. It doesn't make any difference at all how you pronounce it. If kids go e, the, they'll get the word the, whether they say the or the or the, they'll know if they say the, that the word's the. And actually the word's both, because it depends on whether the word that is after it starts with a vowel or a consonant. That's what dictates whether the word is the or the. Like the eagle, the road. So everybody says the or the. But like, these are the conversations about minutia that have nothing to do with the goal of the game. The goal of the game is to read the word. The need to advance more of the code sooner, and some of the roadblocks that are getting in our path that aren't actually going to that end. And that good phonics instruction gets kids reading. That's the goal of good phonics instruction, to get kids reading. That's it, to get kids reading. That's the goal of good phonics instruction. So I just want to play this as well.
Asking you to change his way, and I'm starting because
The mirror has become a big part of how kids are supposed to decode and encode words, which you can see here. Like that is supposed to represent the sound to read and to spell a word. But like that'd be really hard to figure out how to read or spell a word using just the mouths. So a sound wall for independent reading and writing should be something that actually makes sense to kids when they're trying to independently read and write, meaning it connects to something they know at a glance, in a moment, right off the top of their head. Now, how did we get here? This Stanford brain study is one of the main reasons that we got here, because this research shows that active decoding activates the engagement on the left hemisphere, which is where skilled readers show activity when they read. And we know this from backward mapping, what skilled third graders, fourth graders, fifth graders do when we look at where the optimal brain activity lies, whether it's in memorizing or active decoding. We can see that the memorization is triggering right hemisphere engagement. That's where struggling upper grade readers are processing text, kids who have been identified as dyslexic. We can see that strong, skilled readers at upper grades are engaging with text and processing on the left hemisphere, which is where active engagement as they crack words, figure words out. That is the area of the brain that we're seeing engage, and that is where optimal brain circuitry lies. So kids should never memorize words they can just read, because the more they over memorize and under decode, the more the brain becomes conditioned to processing text on the right hemisphere, which is actually natural at the early grade levels when you're memorizing all the words comprised of phonics skills you haven't learned yet. We're still doing that, even with science of reading. But the problem is some kids can't make the transfer back. So kids who are identified as dyslexic, the research suggests that they aren't able to transfer back this right hemisphere engagement for memorization to left hemisphere active decoding as other students are. And so that is where we have structured literacy practice, which is so critical to give kids the ability to access these skills, like UFly, for example. It's a great backbone to make sure that every box is checked, that every T is crossed, and that everybody knows what they're doing, when it's happening, and what they're going to use to do it. It takes about 30 minutes of the day. But 30 minutes of the day isn't going to build deep ownership. What's going to build deep ownership is using those suckers all day long. Now that I've got those skills, I'm going to use it in math, science, social studies, reading, but I can't if I don't have more of them. And I need more of them than just a few in a piecemeal bit. Like I can't wait 3 years for access to the whole code. The program can. The program can take 3 years to divvy out all the pieces, and it should, because the program needs to be structured. It needs to be sequenced. It needs to be ordered. It needs to be explicit. But I'm not a program. I'm a teacher. I can make connections. I can make meaning. I can make sense of the sounds in the phonics patterns that are in the words we also are required to read. And I can do it now. I don't have to wait 2 years. I can give it to them right now. I can tell them AU and AW are in love and they have a huge crush on each other. And if they ever have to stand together in a word, they get so embarrassed. They say, ah, like in the word saw or August, or in the word automatic or hydraulic, because these building blocks don't change. It's just the text level that we apply them to. So in third, fourth, and fifth grade, they're using the same building blocks. They're just big and much higher towers. ER, for words like turn, her, circle, or circumference, T and H, and so on. I've already told you the other ones. So kids need as much of this as they can get as soon as they can have it. And using the brain science, it makes it so easy to deliver. And it starts with this early brain development, taking advantage of that research and understanding that the brain develops back to front, and the earlier developing areas of the brain are the feeling-based affective systems, the behaviors that kids are so good at tattling on and keeping track of and knowing who did what to who and when and what the punishment was. It's not just because they're nosy. It's because those areas of the brain, those socially, emotionally interconnected behavioral bits, that is earlier developing. It is so earlier developing that it's already primed, and there is a depth of ownership to manipulate and hold information there as long as it relates to behaviors they understand. Like, I don't want to get close to Johnny. He spits, and he'll accidentally spit on me if I'm next to him in line. And I can easily make a decision to stand one kid away without using up any of my working memory, because I've seen him spit on 14 people and I don't want to get wet. So like, it's easy when we can use something that drives their behavior every day to drive their decision-making with text in words they've never seen before. So we're taking advantage of these earlier developing feeling-based networks to bypass these later developing executive processing centers to get the information snuck in through the back door. Now, it's going to have to transfer to the higher level processing centers in order to apply it to read the word saw or to read the word August. But we're basically just taking away this whole, it just is, it just does, you just have to remember it, or stick a heart around it. And then, well, you could stick a heart around it in this case, but typically you put a heart around a word because either it's not decodable or you haven't taught the phonics skill they need to decode it. But what if you could? Would you wait? Would you wait? if you could just so easily connect it to something they already know. Like, for instance, having to stand right next to somebody that you have a crush on and getting embarrassed and going, ah, or driving cars and having to stop fast, because we all know how that feels, or what you do to your little brother when he annoys you. Like, would you wait? Would you wait to give that key to a kid who now would have to memorize 100 words because they don't get access to that phonics skill until first grade or second grade? Or would you just go ahead and give it to them and knock out a ton of words that they don't have to memorize anymore and open up the reading block from 30 minutes to the whole day? Because there's text everywhere and phonics secrets are in every word. So anywhere there are words, there are secrets for kids to discover, to reinforce, to use, to learn, to see, to ask about. So paired associate memory is another way to kind of just connect this association. It's taking a memory that you already own, that you already know, that doesn't tax your working memory to dredge up, and connecting it to this new skill piece. When we do that, we bypass the landmines, at least when it comes to phonics skills, that are so often in the way of beginning readers who are just their brains are not developed. The early development from back to front, it's like an empty door up here. Like, you're knocking on the front door, there is no one home, because literally there's no one home. They're like in the back in a lawn chair having a Coke. So you're knocking on a door that hasn't even been built. They may not have even pulled a permit to build the house that will have a door one day yet. That is developmental readiness. It comes on board as it comes on board. But you can go around back and find them right there hanging out, and you can talk their language. And you're not requiring them to go through the front door landmines that are developmental readiness, cognitive processing, working memory, auditory processing, auditory discrimination, speech, language, artic. When I pretend I'm embarrassed and I have a crush on someone, I go, ah, like in the word sa, or pa, or August. I don't have to think about lip position, tongue position, mouth shape. I'm thinking about a feeling that I already understand, and the sound's popping right out of my mouth that rationally, logically connects with that feeling. So it just makes it easy. It makes it accessible. And this is the brain's back door. Now, this is where we're going to wrap up, because this is why it's so important, this need for speed. The Matthew effect, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. It's a snowballing principle that success breeds success. It's not just for reading. I mean, actually, it wasn't even written for reading. Stanovich did some really great research that you'll find links to in the meta-analysis specific to patterns in reading achievement. But, you know, the Matthew effect it's a biblical principle, and it applies to everything, even shirts on eBay. If you're the best seller of white shirts on eBay, guess who gets top ranking? So anybody that wants to buy a white shirt, you're going to automatically pull them up first because they've sold the most white shirts, which means they're going to get to sell more white shirts. But if your white shirt's number 106, you're going to sell a lot less white shirts, because basically people won't go to you to buy the white shirt. They're going to go to the person who sold the most, because that's how it's ranked. So the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. And the snowballing principle that success breeds more success is what leads to an increasing gap between those who have and those who have not. And advantages beget more advantages. So those who start with more accumulate more, and those who start with less find it more challenging to catch up. Now, this isn't always the case. It's not like saying every kid that starts out with advantages is going to do better than kids who don't, because there are so many variations in individuals for so many different reasons. But what it does mean, at least in a reading perspective, is this: you know, as children increase the number of phonics skills they know, they increase the number of opportunities to use them. Because if I know the ow sound, I can read the word how, and now, and about, and flower, and ow. And the good part is, when I read the word now, I get to practice the N sound, n. Ow. Now, when I read the word how, I get to practice the sound. So I get to practice my individual letter sounds more all day long, because I also have the other piece of the pie, which is what letters do when they come together. It takes two to tango. Kids need the individual letter sounds and the sounds letters make together in order to read almost any word. If my name is Howard, I have to wait until second grade to figure out who in the world I am, because when I try to apply my individual letter sounds to read my own name, I get ha-ah-wa-ah-ra-da. And I won't get the ow or the R, A-R, secrets or phonics skills until second grade. I can't wait until second grade to memorize a random sequence of letters in my name. I hear Howard. I have to write ha-wa-ah-ra-ah-da, ha-ah-wa-ah-ra-da. That's not fair. I want to be Tim. Like, that's just not fair. Why do I have to wait? I need it now. I need the ow, and I need it now. And I can have it now if you relate it back to something I already understand, which is what happens when you get hurt. Ow! And even the default, so that kids aren't stopped with the other sound that OW can make. So they're armed, ready to get to the table and have some things up their sleeve to try when they see words they've never laid eyes on before, because they own the building blocks that those words are made up of. And the more building blocks kids have, the more words they can read. And the more kids read, the more opportunities they have to reinforce those building blocks. So good readers get better. The less phonics skills kids have, the less words they can read, the less they do read, the less practice they get, the more reading stinks. And then they're like me, complaining that their mom locked them out on the porch with a book for an hour, and I'll do everything I can think of with my ADD brain with that book, but I don't want to read it because it's no fun, because I can't figure out half the words and I have to skip everything and the sentences don't make sense, and I don't like it. I don't want to do it, so I don't do it. And I don't get the practice that my good reader friends would be getting. Anyway, so as children increase the number of phonics skills they know, they increase the number of opportunities to reinforce them. This is because the more skills they have, the more they can read. The more they can read, the more opportunities they have for practice. And these opportunities in turn provide greater opportunities that lead to an ever increasing cycle of reading success. If a student is able to start reading earlier, they're able to start making sense of things earlier. They're able to map words sooner, which then takes that off of their working memory. They don't have to put so much brain power into figuring out the words. They can relax and enjoy what they're actually reading, which then allows them to build comprehension and take in new vocabulary and identify or connect with characters, behaviors. They have more capacity to do what reading is about earlier on, and therefore kind of snowball all of those skill sets as well. And spelling, all of the pieces that come together that make up this reading recipe, where phonics is just one, but it's the most important one to get everything else off and running. So this snowball effect and this increasing reading success is the reason that we want to make all of our kids rich sooner instead of poor earlier. I don't think that made sense, but anyway, so here, as it applies to reading, basically you can see the trajectory with the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer as they continue moving on those paths. So the initial advantages lead to further gains, while the initial disadvantages hinder their progress. Children who learn to read early get an advantage, enhancing language skills, academic performance over time. Those who struggle continue to face challenges often that affect their overall reading success. Now, this is where we're kind of wrapping up, because what I'm going to be talking about in what you're going to watch in the next deeper dive is how we can have rapid simultaneous skill access, because we need two to tango. We need individual letter sounds and the sounds letters make together to read anything and to read everything. Nothing's off limits. You give what's most needed first. High frequency patterns obviously are going to get them reading the most words. You are working beautifully with the structure of your reading or your phonics program. You're not detouring, derailing. You're implementing with absolute fidelity your reading program or your phonics program, because you're giving kids more to make sense of it with. You get so much more out of a reading program that you can actually read. But when the reading program has words in it comprised of phonics skills that it hasn't taught them yet, it just derails you into memorizing world or heartland world. And you don't have to do that if you can use that as an opportunity to reinforce something that's so easily given, because it's not a skill with an expectation. You're not teaching our controlled vowels 2 years earlier. You're just telling them what happens when you drive fast and you stop quick. And you're connecting that with the symbol association that makes it, which of course I couldn't find, but it's right there. So you're just mapping that connection, and you're doing it 2 years earlier to get the bang for the buck out of all the things you're going to get to use it for, many of which will live in your reading and your phonics program. Even if you use the one I showed with Irving ink bottle and Wally the walrus and all that, you could still use the same connections that make sense to help them remember the connections that don't. Like, it's not either or, it's always and. You don't say, should I put on my glasses or should I get that book and read it? You need the glasses to read the book. Like, should I have a backbone or some blood? Like, you need the backbone to keep you up straight, but you need the blood to flow through everything that's going on in your body. And the blood has no particular path it has to follow. It can go where the need is. And that's exactly what you're doing with the secrets. You're going where the need is. What is the sight word we have to learn this week? Oh, it's the. Oh, that stinks because TH isn't going to be taught till first grade. So I guess at the beginning of kinder, we have to put a heart around it and memorize it. Plus memorize this and that and them and those and there. Or I could just connect it to something you already know that you probably did today 4 times and explain how they're not allowed to sit together. That's it. It's that simple. This little TK student, she wrote my vacation house. Those are the building blocks she has, and she used those to build my vacation house. Pre-K isn't even kindergarten, and she's able to put together what she knows to make something that she wants to say. And everything she used to put that together, she could take apart as a reader. Writing is harder than reading because you have to make choices. As a reader, anything she used to build that means she owns those pieces. And so she could read the word house or now or flower if she knows the other letters, but she's got the ow sound. She just didn't know which one was right for the word house. But the fact that she picked OW means that she does have access to what we call in the front door world a second grade phonics skill. But why? Why does it have to be? Why does it have to be a second grade phonics skill? It's not second grade to know to say ow when someone pinches you. It's something that's already there. Tap that line, run that electrical current through this existing strong power point, and then use this to connect which does it. Because that's the only thing they can't do without you is know which letters do it. They don't need you if they have the connector piece. But if the connector piece isn't there, then you become the connector. And you don't want to be everybody's go-to girl or go-to guy for how do I read, how do I spell. You want a sound wall to do what it should. Be a place where kids can independently access the sounds they need for reading and independently access the spelling patterns they need for writing. And you are not the middleman. You just set it up like a bucket of snacks and they help themselves. Now you are modeling constantly whenever opportunities arise throughout the day, how that's happening, how do you know how to read the word how? Do you see any secrets in the word how? Where are they? Who can tell me what the secret is? Oh, what's their sound? Let's carry that sound back to the word. Let's try to sound that word out. So you're modeling how to find the Jell-O or the coleslaw at the buffet, but you're giving them independence to access it as they need to. And there are no expectations. So for kids who just love to go around going, ow, or, that's fine. That's great, because that incubation time is probably going to be needed by that particular student. They need more time, not less. Some kids require a high level of repetition in order to really own the skill. And that level of repetition can't always be met if that skill isn't taught until second grade for 2 weeks and then they go to another skill. If they can get a 2-year head start, not only will they have it way sooner, but they'll have the time and the space that they personally need to see it, to watch it, to listen to it, to see other people doing it until it clicks for them. And that's when the shift happens from back door to front door as they then apply what it's for to read and to write with it. And that's higher level processing. But we're not pushing. We're just modeling, feeding it so that they want to get up and try the Jell-O. They want to get up and try the macaroni, even though right now they just want to eat their peanut butter. So the 3 A's are a great way to remember what ultimately we can give. We can automate the individual sounds using a melodic mnemonic, which is the better alphabet. We can accelerate the phonic sounds by connecting them to what kids already know and understand and giving them an embedded mnemonic to hold it together tight. And then comes the pièce de résistance, because what you understand, you can hypothesize, you can analyze, you can deduce. So we apply cognitive flexibility for advanced decoding by simply making sense of the most and next most likely behaviors that are likely given what we know about these guys. So that's where the fun starts. Kids get really bored really fast when letters do exactly what they're supposed to, when secrets work exactly the way they're supposed to. What they love is when something doesn't do just what it should. And then they get to play word doctor. What else could it be? What else can we try? And they love to hypothesize all of the ins and outs and ups and downs that normally you would just have to call an exception. Rule exception, black, white, but behaviors aren't black and white. There are a lot of reasons people do things. There are the most likely reasons, the next most likely reasons, and very rarely do they just come out of left field and do something totally unrelated to anything that is a pattern of behavior. So it just changes everything about how much fun it is. And you see the Matthews principle at effect. I was going to wait till you get your big download, watch your other deeper dive, but I just had to show this as part of this Rich Get Richer. This is a kindergarten writing sample as well. But when we talk about the release of cognitive overload or working memory overload, notice how little working memory is being used to pull this writing off in kindergarten. You can see it because down here, not only is he doing a great job trying to use the blocks he has to build the words he wants, spelling isn't great, but it's not invented spelling, it's proper choice spelling, because all the choices he made are ways to depict the sounds he wants. He just doesn't have enough text experience yet to have fine-tuned them. So like for spooky, you can see he wrote SPOOCEE. So a great guess, but as he reads the word spooky more, he'll realize, oh wait, there's a sneaky Y at the end. So what I want to bring your attention to is down here where it says the last 4 lines. The ghost almost kissed her, but the dad said, "Get your hands off my wife." And then they flew away happily ever after. First of all, you can't copy that off a word wall. Like, he built that himself. And he even had enough comfort and ease and automaticity with the sound spellings to relax a little bit and think about more important things. Like, I want an exclamation point here because I want this to really be said with anger. And I want quotation marks because someone's talking here and it's the guy who wants the other guy to get his hands off his wife. Like, he's got all kinds of wheels turning as he's writing this. He is not overly fixated on what sound do I need to write this letter? How do I spell that word? Like, he's building as he goes, and he doesn't even know where this story's going until he gets there. That's what keeps a writer writing. That's what keeps a reader reading, is when the tools are yours, apply them to anything. Take them in any direction you want. You don't have 12 words on a word wall that you're corralled to use all this year. No, you can build whatever you want with the blocks that you have. And the more blocks you have, the more you can actually apply them to read. And the more reading you do, the more fine-tuned your spelling application is. And again, that Matthews principle at work, just perpetuating on and on and on and on. If we go back here really quickly, by the way, think about what most pre-K kids would have. They wouldn't even have individual letters yet. What would she have been doing in a 20-minute block? Sitting there, copying the word blue off the wall, copying the word dog or brown off the word wall. What would she do? She got 20 minutes of high value time by taking the sound symbol connections she knew, both individual sounds and secret phonics patterns, and putting them together to talk about her vacation house. And that's another word that's not going to be on my word wall, vacation house. I would have that on my word wall. I would have big girl, brown she, it can do. And she'd have to come up with some combination of, woohoo, some story to tell with that. So this is valuable time, and this is in pre-K. Imagine the compounded interest of a snowball effect that happens with these skills and whatever more she gains from this point, years before she's supposed to have it. That's what brings our teaching alive, is when kids have something to do it with. Reading and writing is only as powerful as what kids have to bring to the table to do it with. If they don't have anything to bring to the table, they take virtually no value away, other than what I was told in Drop Everything and Read and Drop Everything and Write. They get to feel what it would look like if they did know how to read something. That's not the same. That's not experience. That's exposure. It's better than being locked in a closet, but it's not the same as experience. Experience is a great teacher. This is where kindergarten ended up at the end of the year. Just wanted to show you this. You can see every single kid's writing, good, bad, ugly, all the way across, and in multiple states, not just 2, on the website. This is first grade, same thing. You can see every single student's writing, good, bad, ugly, even a kind of a bell curve, so that you can see and compare. And you can see their initial writing samples as well. So you can see that they did not own, bell curve. So there were like 2 kids that had some individual letters in kindergarten, but like an A or an R for rainbow, or like they just had some awareness there were letters. So I think that's much more telling, but we don't have time to look at that here. You'll get to see a little more of a deep dive, but you can go super deep into the website. Basically, we just need to make these complex phonics skills simple. That's the way to keep phonics from possibly being opted out of by teachers who get too overwhelmed, close their door, and think, I'm just going to do what I normally do and keep my door closed because I can't wrap my head around this. And even if I could, I couldn't make it make sense to him or to her. We don't want that to happen. That's how it becomes extinct again, because phonics gets thrown out with the baby in the bathwater if it becomes if it becomes so impossible that teachers feel like they're not able to do it. So we don't need to make it more complex. We need to make it simpler. We need to learn from the mistakes of the past. We need to stay humble and stay curious, in Emily Hanford's words. And I love that quote that she said that. I think that was timely, and I think it was intentional, because we're not so humble and it seems we're not so curious. We need to be both. Why did phonics disappear? Why did people think it didn't have value when clearly it was the most important person in the room? Phonics is the code. You need the code to crack the code. It took something pretty big for it to be ejected from the party. What was it? Was it that it was overly complicated and teachers weren't doing it and administration gave up and kids were losing control with management because they weren't connecting with what was big? What was it? I'm just hypothesizing, but if you try to teach it in a complicated way, you've got the worst show for the worst audience, and that audience will revolt because that's what kids do. And then teachers have to survive. And so they close their door and then they don't do it. And then other teachers, as Emily also mentioned in her session, haven't had training yet. So they don't even know the content that they then need to take and turn around to deliver to the end user. You have to have the phonics knowledge in order to be able to activate it. And you have to know how to deliver it. You need deliverable buckets to get that information to the end user who is 5 and eating his shoe. So that's critical. And stay humble and stay curious just makes all of that a focal point. Like keep aware of what went wrong so that we don't fall into the similar traps. Chesterton's fence reminds us to be humble and recognize that previous generations had reasons for the decisions they made, and that we need to be curious about why they made those decisions and learn from the past. By having this understanding of how things come to be, we can avoid repeating many of the same mistakes. And by understanding past decisions, we can make better ones. And the beauty for us is we have neuroscience. They didn't have that. They didn't have the capacity to understand early brain development to the degree that we do now. They didn't have a way to measure brain activity and look at at hemispheric engagement and then backward map what that actually means in terms of how we deliver instruction. We don't want to teach kids to read wrong. We don't want kids to memorize words over reading them, because putting that back right is not an easy task for some kids. So why would we intentionally teach kids to memorize more than they read? And yet, aren't we doing that if we teach and deliver the code so slowly that they still have to memorize more words than they can read? A heart isn't kryptonite. So if you put a heart around an easily decodable word, and the reason that you're using is, well, we haven't taught that phonics pattern yet, that makes sense unless the brain science gives us a way to give that phonics pattern, not to teach it, not even to teach it as phonics pattern, to give it, because they already have it, because it's a behavior they already understand. We just have to connect the wiring. That's all we have to do. It's all we have to do. And if it's that easy, why wouldn't we do it? Especially if the science is telling us that it is detrimental to have kids memorize words that they could just read. So the real question is, well, then what words could they just read? And if we go too slow, if the access to the code is too piecemeal across too many grade level years, we're not getting the benefit of the Matthew effect. We're not getting any compounded interest in all the reading and the writing and the drop everything and read times where no reading is happening and no writing can occur. And we're not taking advantage of the neuroscience, which is the main factor that we have now that we didn't have to the degree then. So was it that our ancestors, our previous generation of thought leaders came to a wall that they felt was impassable? And so they threw that wall down and erected one that they felt would be more inviting? Maybe. I mean, there's a lot of different reasonings that we could surmise, but I can say that I am seeing some of the same dinosaur-like tendencies with the complexity, the over-complexity, the overemphasis of things that are not what it's about, coming into play and confusing a lot of teachers into what road they're actually supposed to be going down. And I think Mark Seidenberg said it best when he said, good phonics instruction advances reading. Good phonics instruction leads to one thing, getting kids reading. That's what it's for. That's what good phonics instruction is for. It's not to teach a myriad of other things. You can use similar frameworks to talk about different things at different times for different purposes, and there's great value in that. But you don't need to know something is a diphthong in order to read the word how. Like, that's not part of the path to get a kid reading. And the goal of the game with phonics instruction is to get kids reading. Reading then takes over and becomes the best teacher. The Matthew effect takes hold, the snowball effect occurs, and now you have the perfect audience to deliver all of the other instruction that I think can get confused with where maybe phonics lives and some of those other things lie. Now, one thing that I wanted to make sure that I mentioned specifically along the lines of the Matthew effect and the idea of the need to advance the code is all of the posters up. One of the things that I say in the secret Facebook group is, please, please, please put all the posters up. And I think the Matthew effect really captures perfectly why that's so important. So if you have secret stories in your classroom, if you're already using secret stories, or if you happen to use secret stories in the future, keep the Matthew effect in mind when it comes to the rationale behind offering access to everything. Because the faster kids can have it And the sooner they're inclined to want it, to see it, to ask for it, to notice that those letters on the wall are in this word that they can't read, the more likely they'll be to call you out and ask for the piece that they need to make sense of the word they're looking at. They are theirs for the taking. And only by having all of them up do you remove yourself from the position of a waitress who has to decide whether or not someone gets what, and you're the gatekeeper of all skills. When clearly what the research shows us is that the faster we can access the codes, we can enrich all students sooner and earlier, and do that with equity. Because part of the reason that the science of reading movement and the research behind it is so important is it shows us what's needed to give equitable access to all students to learn how to read, specifically those who need more time and more opportunity for repetition and structured practice. But we also have an obligation to kids who don't need that same amount of time and repetition and structured practice. They need more. They need it now. They want to read this word. They want to spell that word. They want to use the word vacation house in their writing. Or they want to say, get your hands off my wife. Those things require access to skills that your program, the backbone of your instruction, is not set to teach yet formally at that month of that year at that grade level. But our hands aren't tied as teachers. If the secret stories truly are the blood that permeates in and around this structured backbone of the program, then blood goes where it needs to flow. That's the beauty of our blood, is it moves it's constantly fluid and moving, and it goes where it needs to be. And by having all of these posters up, by having access to the entire sound wall and not hiding things or holding things back or waiting to decide when you're going to allow access to what. These are just stories. They do no harm. The connections are only activated once you activate them with the secret. But letting kids in on the fact that there's something up with these patterns, letting them build the visual acuity as their eyes roll over the ones they don't know while they're looking for the one or the two or the three that they do. That's worth its weight in gold from a visual perspective of the mapping. So that when you add the piece that goes with that, which is the sound association, visually, they've already got an awareness that this pattern exists, that it's an entity, that they'll see it in text. Now they have the sound connection that goes with it, and you've already gotten half the work done before you've even introduced the secret. If you are wondering why I'm showing this particular picture, it's not just because of the salty little, listen, people, put up all the posters. It's not just that. I also wanted to say, because I often forget to let teachers know what it is I'm showing, which version of what it is I'm showing. I'm showing these the warm neutrals. And these warm neutral posters are the size that is ideal for your wall, not the smaller flashcards that look like this, because these are also, they're just too small. So it's kind of the equivalent of not having anything up at all, because while this looks like a good size, this looks less so. And then we have some that are even more letter patterns, and some of the letters get to be an inch big, and kids can't use what they can't see. You can't teach from things that you know kids can't see during your instruction. So you're less inclined to take advantage of all these opportunities that permeate your day. So the warm neutral posters are in the warm neutral kit. It's really up to you. Pick your poison. If you have or use secret stories, whichever of the color versions appeal to you is fine. But what I would just implore you to think about specifically, attached to this Matthew effect of rich getting richer, poor getting poorer, and equity for all students to access what they need when they need it, with nothing held back and nothing that's overwhelming, is to get all of the posters up, and to please use posters and not flashcards, because that is the fastest path to making everybody rich at the earliest possible grade level, and leaving none of our students behind. None of our students are high, are medium, are low, anyone in between, and letting them be in the driver's seat for their own instruction, letting them lead the journey of learning, because they know what they need to do the job. They're the men on the ground trying to make sense of the words that are in their environment. And they know that if they can't, the answer is right here. They just need you to connect the dots for them. I hope that this overview gives you a little bit of perspective into my thinking and how it aligns with this more global thinking about how we got here and how we can make the most of where we are for our kids today, right now. These kids, not the kids in 4 years when we figure it out and we do a trial and error and feel that didn't work. Well, boy, this was wrong. No, right now. How do we simplify and fast track and access the code right now as fast, as early, and as easily as possible to get kids reading and not get distracted by any of the periphery things that don't go toward advancing the code. Phonics instruction should advance the code, learner access to the code to get kids reading. It's a real laser beam focus. So I hope that you enjoyed this. If I've left you with all kinds of questions about, but how, what do I do? When do I do it? Where does it start? What does it look like? How do I promise you all of that is going to be in your meaty deep dive session, which I think I called a keynote because I actually filmed it before. This is the add-on to that. So while it's called a keynote, it's actually a special session because it's a meaty, chunky, deep dive into everything you need to know to really take this and run with it in your own classroom, no matter what your grade level is, no matter what students you teach, and no matter what language they speak. So thank you so much for joining me. Have a wonderful rest of the conference. And I'm so glad that you were able to join me.